So let's talk about writing good survey questions. If you don't write a good one, if it somehow misleads the person being surveyed, or if it's just difficult to understand, it won't effectively measure what you're trying to measure. Here's a couple of examples. What's the problem with the first one? This was covered in the text. But it's called a double negative. It's not a double negative like in an example like this one. But look at how much clearer that sentence would be if you just take out the not. Otherwise, do you favor or oppose not, and then it becomes confusing as to what it is you're trying to answer. Or look at the second one. Again, this is kind of a matter of diction, and in this case, we're presented with an acronym. My first reading, I didn't know what it was. Perhaps some of you do. I think you'd be more likely to know what this was if you lived in Alaska or something. But again, other types of words can create problems. Jargon can create problems. So it's best to think about your vocabulary that you're using as well. Is it going to connect with that general audience that you're trying to access, typically with a survey? Here's another similar example. What's the difference between these two questions? So what's the difference between it being legal for doctors to give terminally ill patients the means to end their lives, or it being legal for doctors to assist terminally ill patients in committing suicide? 51% supported the first one, 44% supported the second one. And of course, with a sensitive issue like that, 7 points, percentage points, could be very important. But the problem is one of diction, word choice, and also with the idea of words having connotations and denotations. A word's denotation is its dictionary meaning. Remember that by the D in dictionary. The connotation is the way that we feel about a word. An example would be a word with kind of a neutral connotation would be the word flag. If we say American flag, we hope that has a positive connotation. If we say Nazi flag, that would have a negative connotation for most people. But we have to think about in this case, the word suicide has a very negative connotation, and you can see this is actually, I was looking at the Pew Research Foundation, and this was something that they had indicated in this particular instance with word choice. We also have this idea of acquiescence bias, and what that is when people are kind of forced into making a choice. For example, we have this one: the best way to ensure peace is through military strength. With that one, 55% agreed, 42% disagreed. Okay? Well, look at what happens when you give people a choice. In this case, when they have a choice, more people chose diplomacy over military strength. And this is also another good way to think about survey questions. We were talking about word choice and so forth, is also in terms of logic. and it's a good idea to think about logical fallacies, to review logical fallacies, to make sure that your survey questions don't fall into the fallacious reasoning. And this one, as a matter of fact, is a good example of what's referred to in uh, logical fallacies as either or reasoning, okay? Where you're presented with one idea when actually there are more, or one solution when actually there's more than one solution to a problem, which is true of most problems anyway. And we'll come back to that in a minute. I have a source you can go to look at on fallacious reasoning. How about this one? This one was covered by Hughes and Hayhoe. It's called a double-barreled question. And I've written this one so I don't have to revise it next year. But I mean, you know, this is, if you were actually to ask this question of any president, they very likely they would have different strengths, different abilities, and many presidents are able to handle domestic issues better than foreign ones, or vice versa. But this, again, this would be better done as two questions. How do you think he would handle domestic policy, and how do you think he would handle foreign policy? So the general problem with surveys is the data is self-reported. Attributes like this tend to be overstated. That is, people tend to say they give more to charities than they actually do. And on the other hand, things like drug and alcohol use tend to be understated. You know, people drink less, say they drink less than they actually do. So those are some problems with surveys. Um, and then what I mentioned before about there's a group called the NISCOR organization, which was actually developed in opposition to Holocaust denial. And you know, for example, when you go to this website, it has a whole listing of logical fallacies. That's not the only thing on the website. It's actually kind of a sideline. And they recently revised it and improved it. But when you click on the link, you'll get a page like this one. It gives you lots of examples, kind of a model for the logical fallacy, and they're calling this false dilemma, black and white thinking, either or reasoning is another one that I've seen. These go, the logical fallacies go all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle had an entire treatise on them, separate from his rhetoric treatise. But if you look at the one down at the bottom of the page, look, you're either going to have to make up your mind. Either you decide that you can afford this stereo, or you decide you're going to have to do it without music for a while. And that's a good example of either or reasoning. And of course, there are other ways to listen to music. So, but that it would be worth your while before you put your survey out to take a look at some of these logical fallacies and see if there are any types of issues like that with your surveys. Questions? I'll see you online.